Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a really fascinating piece of intellectual analysis, Ali Mohammed Al-Shurafa Al-Hammadi's project on correcting Islamic discourse. Now, whether you're a theology buff or just someone interested in how ancient texts shape our modern world, this is a seriously compelling framework to unpack. Just to be clear right up front, we aren't here to take sides or endorse any specific viewpoints today. We're just going to impartially break down the mechanics of this proposed framework and see exactly how the author tries to reconcile an original, absolute text with centuries of human interpretation.
And this really gets to the absolute core problem the project is trying to solve. You see, intellectual history is rarely just a straight, simple line from a sacred text to pure human understanding. Over the centuries, layers of interpretation, commentary, and rulings kind of piled up, and eventually, those very human attempts to understand the text gained what the author calls an indirect holiness. It's like they became so glued to the religion itself that they actually started to overshadow the original text. So, to wrap our heads around all of this, here is our roadmap for today. We'll start with text versus human interpretation, move into correcting the discourse, then look at restoring women's agency, marriage as a covenant, divorce as a process, and finally wrap up with family as the social foundation.
All right, kicking things off with Section 1, Text versus Human Interpretation.
The entire foundation of this project really hinges on a massive, stark contrast. On one hand, you have the divine discourse, which is defined here as the absolute original Quranic text. It's the ultimate, unquestionable baseline. On the other hand, you have fiqh, or Islamic jurisprudence. The author makes a huge point to categorize fiqh not as absolute truth, but as human, historically contextualized attempts to understand that divine discourse. The argument here is that over time, the general public basically lost the ability to tell the two apart, treating historical human rulings as if they were literally the divine text itself.
Moving right along to Section 2, Correcting the Discourse.
So, what does Al-Hammadi actually mean by correction or tasweeb? This is absolutely crucial. He's very careful to point out that this is not about inventing a new religion or rewriting the faith, not at all. It's actually an effort to free religious understanding from the massive weight of historical accumulation. Think of it like stripping away centuries of old paint to reveal the original wood underneath. It's about recalibrating the compass so it points directly back to the original textual source as the supreme authority, bypassing all those historical disputes.
But honestly, the source text itself acknowledges a really tough dilemma here. It sounds great in theory, but practically speaking, how do you actually separate human interpretation from the core religion without totally throwing out the immense value of that historical experience? It is a massive analytical puzzle to dismantle centuries of heritage while still holding on to the wisdom that was gained along the way.
Let's dive into Section 3, Restoring Women's Agency.
According to this reading, the original text laid down a foundation of absolute equality right from the get-go. The project argues that the text created a framework of fundamental human unity. There's no inherent superiority built in. Instead, any differences in status or dignity are based entirely on a person's work, their responsibility, and their piety. Gender literally doesn't factor into it.
Now, this is a pretty sharp critique of historical interpretations. Historically speaking, fiqh was heavily influenced by the social structures of its time, right? So it ended up creating a kind of social hierarchy. It restricted women's roles and tied them to different levels of guardianship. But in stark contrast, this project's reading of the original text places women front and center. It views them as fully competent, financially independent entities who are directly responsible to God, no human mediator or guardian required.
Which, again, leaves us with a really tricky practical question. It's one thing to outline this beautiful, egalitarian, value-based framework on paper, but how do you actually translate that paradigm shift into a stable, functioning legal system today, especially when you're trying to do it without causing a massive collision with deeply entrenched historical systems? The text leaves this as a major, ongoing debate.
All right, Section 4, Marriage as a Covenant.
This framework presents two radically different ways of looking at marriage. The traditional fiqh view often treats it heavily like a legal contract. The source describes this older view as a bit cold, highly authoritative, and honestly almost bordering on a logic of ownership. But Al-Hammadi's reading completely flips the script. He insists the original text actually frames marriage as a deeply human covenant. It's meant to be a true partnership built entirely on tranquility, affection, and mercy, not on dominance or control. Because of this shift, traditional marital duties get a complete overhaul. They are looked at through a purely ethical lens now. Things like maintenance, the dowry, or obedience are reframed as elements of an organized partnership based on mutual consent. Maintenance isn't a price tag, a dowry isn't a transaction, and obedience certainly isn't about canceling out a woman's free will. They are just organizational tools for shared dignity, rather than weapons of authority.
Which brings us to Section 5, divorce as a process.
The text makes a really strong point here. Leaving divorce up to a sudden, momentary emotional reaction is incredibly dangerous. It strips the family of its balance and hands its entire destiny over to a fleeting moment of anger. According to this project, the original textual intent was for divorce to be a disciplined, deliberate path. It should be governed by calm reasoning and institutional oversight, completely preventing a sudden emotional snap from destroying a family in seconds.
So to take divorce from a knee-jerk emotional reflex to a proper institutional process, the project lays out a strict, logical progression. First up, you have to genuinely attempt reform and reconciliation. If that fails, step 2 is formal arbitration between the parties. And finally, step 3 is strict documentation and witnessing. The whole point is to ensure any separation is dictated by cool heads and clear reasoning.
But as always, implementing this raises a really precise legal dilemma. Yes, official documentation is socially powerful and stabilizing, but from a strict legal standpoint, is the paperwork an absolute prerequisite for the divorce to be legally valid, or is it just an organizational step that happens after the fact? It perfectly highlights the tension between trying to reform social practices while navigating those established legal traditions.
Finally, let's look at Section 6, Family, the Social Foundation. The big takeaway here is that you cannot look at the family as just some isolated, private little bubble. Within this analytical framework, the family is literally the silent, foundational bedrock of all societal stability. The argument is pretty straightforward. You simply can't have a functioning, stable society if the foundational text governing its most basic unit, the family, is being misunderstood or misapplied. The ripple effects here are just massive, because the family is that foundational bedrock. If it fractures, that damage doesn't just stay inside the house. The text asserts the family breakdown creates a domino effect. It negatively impacts children's education. It reshapes broader behavioral norms. It fractures community relations and ultimately degrades the entire moral structure of society. So fixing the family isn't just closing a legal loophole. It is a critical societal imperative.
And that brings us to the end of our analysis today. I want to leave you with this final, highly provocative thought derived straight from the text. If the family is the absolute foundation of society, and the original text is the foundation of the family, then is correcting our reading of that text the absolute prerequisite for any broader cultural renaissance? It's a fascinating question that really bridges the gap between ancient theology and our modern societal health. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I hope this breakdown helped clarify the structure and the arguments of a genuinely thought-provoking project. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you in the next one.
مؤسسة رسالة السلام العالمية، رسالة إنسانية لعالم أكثر سلاماً.